Welcome back to MI. I'm Jacqueline Hennessy. They were the prescriptive, no-brainer diets everyone had been waiting for. Simply lay off the pasta, rice and bread, indulge in all the steak, bacon and eggs you want, and still lose weight. But today, years after the Atkins and Zone-inspired low-carb craze hit North America and subsequent lawsuits blaming the diets for misinformation leading to heart disease, opinions are changing about their benefits. Here to tell us what the low-carb craze has taught us, as well as what actually does work, is Barbara Parisotto, registered dietitian for the Clinic for Sport Medicine at the Fitness Institute. Thank you so much for joining us, Barbara.
Thank you for having me.
Well, what exactly has happened in terms of the North American eating landscape after Atkins and the Zone? What have you seen in your practice?
Right. What's happening now is we have a huge swing from the low-fat craze to the low-carb craze. And so virtually everyone has removed breads, cereals, rice, pasta for the things you described already. So our meats, our eggs, and a lot of protein and high-fat items. So we've had a huge swing in the system.
And a lot of your clients, do they follow these low-carb diets?
They do, or they have. A lot of the time, by the time they've come to see me, they're coming off of the low-carb, and that's why they're now in the dietitian's office.
And why is that?
For a number of reasons. So either their weight has plateaued and the diet isn't working any longer. They've been on it for a few months and can't maintain it anymore because it's a difficult diet to follow. And so they're trying another alternative. Others have had some of the consequences. So whether their cholesterol has been elevated or other side effects that could come out of a low-carb diet. So now they're in my office to discuss healthier eating behaviors.
Now, you raise a very important issue, and one that hasn't really been touted a lot, particularly by the low-carb camps. And these are the negative aspects of a low-carb diet. But could you just refresh us for a second on the negative, the not-so-nice consequences of a low-carb diet?
Of the low-carb diet. I'd say predominantly, right off the bat, for someone who's on it in the short term, things like low energy might result because we've cut out carbohydrate, which is a main fuel source for our bodies. So things like fatigue, weakness, decreased concentration could just be some of the general side effects that someone might not even be aware of initially until they've reintroduced carbohydrates and felt the difference in energy levels. Some of the longer term consequences would be things like your lipid profile changing, so elevated cholesterol, because if you're not having carbohydrates, you're now substituting with something else, and usually that is our meat and dairy, which are cholesterol type foods. So that's definitely a consequence you might see if you maintain that type of diet.
And in terms of things like ketosis, where your body's feeding off of itself,
right.
What are some of the not so nice aspects of putting your body in such a state? Right.
So someone who stays on it long term, if they're entering ketosis, then one of the side effects that's more noticeable, I guess, is bad breath, and so we get an acetone smelling breath. Some of the more severe consequences could be that you're going to have an effect on your kidneys because you're now producing a lot of uric acid, which your kidneys cannot keep up with in terms of excreting. So, and also gout is another one where, again, because our bodies have so much uric acid production and we can't get rid of it, those are two types of longer term consequences if you're predisposed to those types of conditions.
So there are potential long-term and short-term negative or disadvantages to these diets. But in terms of compliance, just how good have you found people how good are people at staying with these diets and sticking to them?
Right. I find with the low carbohydrate diet, there's definitely good compliance for up to 6 months for sure because they see the results. It's instant gratification. So definitely there is compliance there. About 6 months, I think people start to wane because it's difficult. It's hard to eliminate an entire carbohydrate food group, you know, the grains from your diet, and it's hard to maintain. And so people tend to come off, I'd say, in, 6 months or so. I have seen some clients who maintain it long term, so up to 2 years, and are feeling the side effects, and so again are eventually coming off of it. In other circumstances, I see people using it as a quick fix. So you need to lose weight for vacation, okay, I'm going to go low carb, and then I go back to my regular eating habits, but that weight will come back. And so some people are using it as a quick fix for when it's convenient for them.
What about athletes? Because you work with a lot of athletes. How does a low carb diet actually affect somebody who is really putting a lot of demands on their body?
Right, especially in athletes. Carbohydrate is really important to fuel their activity. And even in my amateur athletes or people just working out but on a regular basis, definitely carbohydrates becomes a key fuel source in activity. And so what we see a lot of for people going into a gym setting and working out for extensive periods of time is hypoglycemia. So the same side effect that you would have in a diabetic person. So when you're not having carbohydrates and then you go work out, well, the blood sugars come down, and so you're going to have a hypoglycemic response. So again, that could be lightheadedness, dizziness, feeling faint, and so they need to have some carbohydrate source. So definitely in the athletic areas, carbohydrates still need to remain a very high part of your diet.
So what is your best advice then to people who, again, don't want to, well, they're considering the low-carb diet just because, as you said, it might give them a quick fix to lose a bit of weight, but what is your best advice to make sure that they are covering all their bases regarding nutrition and they aren't doing any damage long-term?
Right. I'd say you can definitely benefit from a reduction in carbohydrate depending where you're starting from. So it really comes down to the individual. If you're having carbohydrates in excess, it will lead to weight gain, just like any other type of energy, so protein or fat. So depending where you're coming from, you may consider reducing carbohydrates or the type of carbohydrate. So you might choose higher fiber, whole grain foods versus white refined starches and things like that. So you definitely want to include carbohydrate, but you can modify the types and the amounts of carbohydrate. For someone who wants to stay on the lower end, because that's where they're comfortable, maybe they're coming off a low carbohydrate diet again, I'd recommend staying on the lower end, but again, adding them back in, so maybe only 2 or 3 servings a day versus the general recommendation of 5. So you can have a low carbohydrate without eliminating them altogether.
No, you'd mentioned specifically the type of carbohydrate is important too. Very quickly, what are some of the kinds of carbohydrates that are better left just completely untouched?
Untouched? Definitely the refined white breads and cereals, things that are lower in fiber, high in sugar. So pure sugar, our candies, our chocolate bars, those are not really benefiting us in any way except for a sugar rush and that energy push. So really you want to try to choose more your whole grains, your brown breads, your high fiber cereals and things of that sort, fruits and vegetables.
Okay, excellent. So a trip to the donut store really isn't in our best interest then,
No, not
although
unless
it is tasty.
Yes, occasionally, again, all in moderation, of course, but if you're going to eliminate certain carbs, those are the ones you want to go for.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I really appreciate your clearing the air for us on the issue. Thanks for joining us, Barbara.
Thank you.
That was Barbara Parisotto, registered dietitian for the Clinic for Sport Medicine at the Fitness Institute. Next up, it's the MI Top 7. Stay tuned.